Hey guys, tonight we drift into the humid barracks of Guinea in the early 2000s, where the air smells faintly of red dust and diesel fuel, and the rhythm of boots on cracked concrete is the only clock that matters. Picture a young officer, lean, sharp-eyed, moving like someone who already knows he'll stand in front of crowds one day. Outside, the air shimmers in the heat. Inside, ambition hums under the sound of orders barked and rifles cleaned. This is not the Guinea of tourist postcards. This is the Guinea where military service is both a calling and a lottery ticket to power. And you probably won't survive this if you think it's just a straight climb. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and the local time right now. I'm curious where and when you're listening. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The young officer, Moussa Dadis Camara, doesn't arrive in the army by accident. Born in the forested Nzerekore region, far from the capital's marble buildings, he grows up under the long shadow of Guinea's military rulers. In the market, women still talk about the 1984 coup that toppled Ahmed Sékou Touré's post-independence regime, and how quickly soldiers learned to decide not just politics, but prices, rations, and even marriages. For a boy with an appetite for order and the gift of reading a room in seconds, the army looks less like a uniform and more like a key. His entry is marked by drills in the fierce West African sun, hundreds of recruits moving in perfect unison, the dust turning their sweat into a fine red crust. Camara thrives in this. His instructors note the way he rarely looks tired, the way he memorizes procedures like their song lyrics, the way he's already quietly working the hierarchy to his advantage. Guinea's armed forces in the early 2000s are both disciplined and deeply political. Soldiers know that their rifles can be as much about securing food for their families as defending borders. The barracks chatter is a blend of football scores, whispered rumors about promotions, and knowing laughs about ministers who owe their power to a colonel's nod. Camara listens more than he speaks, but when he does talk, it's with the precise mix of confidence and humility that makes older men think he's worth keeping close. By his mid-20s, he's earned postings that take him far from his birthplace, coastal cities, dusty interior garrisons, and eventually, the capital, Conakry. In each place, he collects not just experience, but names. Storekeepers who can get you flour in a shortage, clerks who can lose a file for the right favor, and, most importantly, other officers who believe in his potential. One historical fact that frames his early career: by 2008, Guinea's president Lansana Conté is ailing and largely absent from public life, but his grip on the country remains iron through loyal generals. The army knows a change is coming. It just doesn't know when or how. Information closest to Camara suggests he's quietly watching those senior officers lose their edge, taking longer lunches, skipping inspections, letting trusted aides run things. He's not old enough to be seen as a threat, but not so junior that he's invisible. This sweet spot gives him freedom to observe without suspicion. Life in the barracks is a strange mix of camaraderie and competition. Men eat from the same pot, yet watch each other's promotions with a hawk's suspicion. Camara learns early to smile when someone else gets the post he wanted, and to celebrate their good fortune with a handshake. Many people still think that his ability to mask disappointment this way is what kept him out of trouble long enough to rise. So what do you think? Does patience really win in a place where ambition moves at the speed of a firing squad? As the years tick toward the late 2000s, the young officer's name has already crossed the desks of men who will soon decide Guinea's future. He doesn't yet know it, but the corridors of power are opening, one creaking suspicious door at a time. The whispers start small, as they always do. In the mess hall, between bites of rice and sauce, someone mutters about shortages in pay. In the dim-lit barracks corridors, others talk about the president's health, lowering their voices when boots approach. Camara hears it all, not because he's prying, but because he knows when to stand still long enough for the truth to pass by. Guinea, in the mid-2000s, is a country holding its breath. President Lansana Conté's once commanding presence has faded into a series of rare public appearances and grainy television images of a tired man. Yet, the machinery of power grinds on, lubricated by the loyalty of generals who built their fortunes under his watch. These men are veterans of intrigue, but even veterans grow careless when the clock runs long enough. Within the army, discontent is layered. The rank and file complain about food, gear, and the lack of pay raises. Mid-level officers grumble about stalled promotions and favoritism. The upper brass worry about holding on to what they've built when the inevitable change comes. To an observer like Camara, the tension is almost musical. Different sections of the orchestra playing their own notes, waiting for someone to step up and conduct. He notices patterns. A captain who once barked orders with crisp efficiency now slouches in his chair, delegating inspections to subordinates. An old colonel begins skipping ceremonial duties, citing doctor's orders no one can verify. At the officers' club, there's more drinking than strategizing. In a culture where weakness is blood in the water, Camara sees opportunity and risk. In the streets of Conakry, rumors of the president's illness slip from cafes to market stalls, traveling faster than any official statement. Shopkeepers joke, quietly, about how long before someone new arrives to set the prices for fuel and rice. Taxi drivers pass along the latest speculation with the same tone they use to discuss a football score. It's not open rebellion, but it's the early humidity before a storm. One mainstream historical fact underscores this moment. By December 2008, Lansana Conté's health problems are so severe that he can barely address the nation, often delegating critical matters to aides. His absence creates a vacuum in a country where stability has always been tied to a visible leader. Information closest to Camara suggests that around this time, he starts getting invited to small gatherings after hours, quiet meetings of younger officers who share their frustrations over beers and cigarettes. These aren't plotting sessions, not yet, but they are the kind of conversations where trust is built, and trust is the scaffolding for action. The whispers grow louder in the weeks before Conté's final days. Reports of military pay arriving late, or not at all, circulate like wildfire. Soldiers who once boasted about their connections now keep their heads down. Civil servants complain about the same things but in different words. Everyone knows something is about to happen. They just don't know who will have the nerve to make the first move. Many people still think that Camara's real talent was not his military skill, but his ability to keep a straight face when someone said something reckless, letting them talk, letting them believe he was only half listening, while storing every word for later. So, what do you think? Is silence the best weapon in politics? Or does it just delay the inevitable? As Conté's grip weakens, so too does the invisible chain holding the country's factions together. To the untrained eye, life goes on. Markets buzz, music drifts from radios, and soldiers stand at their posts. But beneath it all, alliances are being tested, and lines are being drawn in places no one can yet see. Camara stands at the edge of this shifting landscape, neither pushing events forward nor stepping back. He waits, poised between duty and ambition, knowing that in Guinea, the man who moves at the exact right moment doesn't just survive. He rewrites the order of things. The night that changes everything begins like any other. Humid air settling over Conakry, the sea breeze carrying the faint scent of salt and diesel from the port. In the barracks, Camara runs his routine. He walks the rows of bunks, notes the condition of rifles stacked in racks, and chats briefly with sentries about the quiet shift. It is the calm of a city that doesn't yet know its leader has taken his last breath. News of President Lansana Conté's death doesn't arrive with an official broadcast first. It seeps in through private phone calls, whispers passed between aides, and the sudden urgency in the footsteps of men in plain suits. Soldiers hear it before civilians. The information moves like a shadow, visible only when it passes close. Camara receives word in the early hours. The message is simple. He's gone. No ceremony, no hesitation. For years, the country has been told the president was still in command. Now, the vacuum is real, and everyone with ambition feels it like an open door. In Guinea's history, power shifts have rarely been smooth. Coups have been the punctuation marks on the nation's political sentences, short, sharp, and decisive. This time, the punctuation is already being written before the public even hears the news. Senior officers scramble to secure their positions. Ministers phone foreign embassies to assure continuity, and somewhere in the capital, loyalists and opportunists meet in quiet rooms to decide who will speak first. The army becomes the fulcrum. In a country where the military has always been the ultimate guarantor or usurper of power, whoever commands the loyalty of the right units can shape the state in hours. Camara, still not among the highest ranks, understands the moment instinctively. His advantage is that he's not on anyone's list of prime suspects. He moves quietly, speaks less than usual, but listens to every corridor conversation like a student before an exam. One mainstream historical fact. On December 23, 2008, within hours of Conté's death, a group calling itself the National Council for Democracy and Development, CNDD, announced it had seized control, effectively carrying out a bloodless coup. This speed blindsided many political observers. Information closest to Camara suggests he had already built ties with some of the officers who would step forward under the CNDD banner. He wasn't yet the public face. That role would come. But he was present in key strategy sessions where the mood shifted from speculation to action. His role was as much about trust as tactics, knowing which barracks would follow orders without hesitation and which might resist. The night's tension builds toward a single broadcast. A voice on the state radio interrupts the regular programming to announce the president's death and the military's assumption of control. It's not delivered with bluster. It's calm, even oddly respectful. But the message is unmistakable. The era has ended, and the army is now in charge. In the city, reactions are mixed. Some citizens step outside to share the news with neighbors. Others lock their doors, remembering past coups and their chaos. Taxi drivers, who always seem to know more than the news, offer passengers their own theories of who's really in control. Many people still think that this was the moment Camara began stepping from shadow to center, that in those tense hours, he proved to certain power brokers that he could be both decisive and loyal. So what do you think? Is loyalty a tool for rising to power, or the thing that gets you trapped serving someone else's plan? By dawn, soldiers stand at intersections, not in aggressive posture, but as a reminder. The city is quiet. The market opens late. Radios replay the announcement between music meant to calm the mood. The coup, for now, is bloodless. But every man in uniform knows that the hardest part isn't taking power. It's keeping it when everyone's still deciding if they'll follow you tomorrow. Morning breaks over Conakry with a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. The light is soft, almost apologetic, as though the sun itself knows the country has entered unfamiliar territory. People gather in clusters, outside cafes, by market stalls, at bus stops, speaking in low voices about the soldiers now visible at nearly every corner. The coup has landed without gunfire, but the air feels taut, like a rope stretched just short of snapping. Camara spends the early hours moving between posts. His uniform is crisp, his expression unreadable. He understands that in moments like this, perception is power. How a soldier stands, how he speaks, whether his hand rests lightly or firmly on his rifle. These small details decide whether civilians feel reassured or threatened. The CNDD leadership wastes no time in shaping its first image. Within a day, the group announces on national radio and television that it will restore democracy, end corruption, and bring stability. These are not new promises in Guinea's political history, but they land differently now. The country's longtime leader has just been buried. The people are ready to listen, if not to believe. One mainstream historical fact sets the tone. Moussa Dadis Camara, previously little known outside military circles, emerges quickly as the public face of the CNDD. His mix of direct speech, soldier's bearing, and willingness to engage with ordinary citizens makes him a novel figure in the political theater of Guinea. Information closest to Camara reveals that this public role isn't an accident. Those who know him say he's been preparing for years, watching how other leaders present themselves, studying speeches, and learning when to mix charm with authority. Even before cameras find him, he's thinking about how to talk not just to generals and ministers, but to market women, taxi drivers, and students. The CNDD's early days are a flurry of gestures meant to build trust. Soldiers escort fuel trucks to ensure deliveries. Roadblocks appear not just for security, but as opportunities for officers to be seen, keeping order. State media broadcasts footage of CNDD members visiting hospitals, schools, and markets, images of leadership woven into the daily rhythm of life. Camara leans into this performance. He speaks in simple, direct language. He listens when people complain and offers solutions on the spot, even if they're promises that will take months or years to fulfill. Crowds start to chant his name in the streets, their voices carrying more curiosity than loyalty at first. But curiosity is the first step. At the same time, shadows begin to lengthen. Not everyone in the military is pleased with his sudden prominence. Senior officers, many of whom have spent decades in the hierarchy, see in him a dangerous speed of ascent. These men smile in public, but measure him in private, deciding whether he is an asset to be used or a threat to be neutralized. Camara senses it. He adjusts his style, still visible, still outspoken, but careful not to challenge the most entrenched figures too soon. In private, he continues to meet with allies who are loyal less to the CNDD and more to him personally. This dual network, official and informal, becomes the backbone of his growing influence. Many people still think that his public tours were less about governance and more about securing personal loyalty from the grassroots, bypassing the traditional chain of command. So, what do you think? Can a leader survive by leaning on popular affection when the generals behind him are keeping score? Weeks into the coup, The parade of promises is still in full swing. School children wave flags when his convoy passes. Vendors shout his name from roadside stalls. For now, the image holds. A young, energetic leader ready to sweep away years of stagnation. But in Guinea, history has a way of testing how long the shine can last before the rust shows through. Inside the presidential palace, the marble floors still echo with the footsteps of men who no longer hold office. Their portraits remain on the walls, gazing down with stern expressions as though judging the newcomers. For Camara, the palace is not just a seat of power, it's a chessboard where every corridor and doorway hides a potential ally or adversary. The first weeks after the coup bring a flood of visitors. Former ministers, business tycoons, religious leaders, and tribal elders all arrive with the same goal: to understand where they fit in the new order. Camara watches them carefully. Some bow too deeply, eager to please. Others are stiff and formal, unwilling to acknowledge that a younger man now has the authority they once wielded over him. Shadows move in the palace, not literal ones, but political ones. Power in Guinea is rarely a clean, straight path. Deals are made in side rooms, promises whispered in the space between handshakes. The CNDD may have taken the country, but it has not yet tamed the palace's invisible networks. Every day, Camara must navigate around figures who smile at him in public while plotting against him in private. One mainstream historical fact grounds this moment. The CNDD quickly dissolved the Constitution and dismissed the National Assembly, consolidating both executive and legislative powers. It was framed as a necessary step to reset the state, but it also concentrated authority in military hands. Information closest to Camara indicates he begins appointing loyalists to key roles, not just in the cabinet, but in security services and state-owned companies. These appointments are as much about trust as competence. He favors those with personal history, men he served alongside in the barracks, those who owe him favors, and those who understand the risks of betraying him. The tension in the palace thickens with each passing day. Senior officers, accustomed to moving policy from behind the scenes, now find themselves sidelined. Some adapt, seeking proximity to Camara. Others sulk in their offices, waiting for a mistake that will let them reclaim influence. Meanwhile, the city outside is watching closely. Citizens note which ministers keep their posts and which vanish without explanation. Journalists speculate about divisions within the CNDD. Though the state press paints a picture of unity, many people still think that the young leader's willingness to bypass traditional hierarchies was both his greatest strength and the seed of his eventual troubles. So what do you think? Can a system built on loyalty over structure survive when the stakes are this high? In quieter moments, Camara walks the palace's inner gardens. He listens to the rustle of palm leaves, the splash of the central fountain, and the distant hum of the city beyond the gates. It is in these moments that he weighs his next moves, not just the policies to announce, but the people to trust. The shadows in the palace are growing, and in Guinea, shadows have a way of striking when the sun is at its brightest. Beyond the palace walls, Guinea's wealth lies deep in the earth. Gold, bauxite, iron ore, resources that could fund a nation's prosperity or fuel its corruption. In the months after the coup, the scent of money draws not just local power brokers, but foreign investors, smugglers, and fixers who have been circling for years. Camara quickly learns that control of Guinea's resources is as much about politics as geology. The mining sector is the crown jewel, and whoever directs its contracts controls rivers of cash. Officially, the CNDD promises transparency. Unofficially, the hallways hum with negotiations. Representatives from multinational companies arrive with thick portfolios and thicker wallets, offering infrastructure projects and consultancy fees in exchange for favorable terms. One mainstream historical fact anchors this moment. Guinea holds some of the world's largest reserves of bauxite, the ore used to make aluminum, making it a strategic target for both Western corporations and emerging economies like China. Information closest to Camara suggests that while he is not a mining expert, he understands leverage. In private meetings, he plays suitors against each other, one day expressing interest in a European-backed proposal, the next hinting that an Asian consortium has offered better terms. These maneuvers keep everyone off balance and him in control of the tempo. It's not just mining. Oil exploration off Guinea's coast is whispered about in diplomatic cables. Timber rights in the lush interior are quietly exchanged, and in each of these sectors, Camara's network begins to appear. Officers, family members, and trusted businessmen who serve as intermediaries, shielding him from direct exposure while ensuring the flow of benefits. The streets of Conakry don't see these deals, but they feel the ripples. A sudden influx of new vehicles in the capital hints at fresh cash. Certain neighborhoods see construction projects rise overnight, funded by invisible hands. Those close to the regime grow richer. Those far from it notice little change. Foreign envoys request meetings, offering aid packages wrapped in conditions. Camara listens, smiling politely, but rarely commits to anything binding. His strategy is simple: keep every option open, commit to nothing until it serves him. Many people still think that his early handling of resource deals showed more cunning than his political speeches ever did. So what do you think? Does a leader's skill lie in talking to the people, or in quietly shaping the deals that decide their future without them knowing? But with resource wealth comes risk. Smugglers push harder at the borders, sensing new opportunities in the post-coup shuffle. Rival officers begin to question who is really benefiting from the foreign agreements. And in Guinea's long history, resource wealth has often been the spark for rivalries that burn hotter than any political dispute. Camara knows this. In late-night meetings, he insists on rotating key officers in and out of posts near the mines and ports, keeping anyone from building too strong a grip. The strategy works, but it also breeds resentment. In a country where wealth flows through narrow channels, cutting someone off can turn an ally into an enemy overnight. Control is a living thing. It must be fed daily. In the months following the coup, Camara learns that the real art of leadership is not just making promises, but ensuring that every lever of authority remains in reach. Laws are rewritten. Decrees are signed that place entire sectors under direct military oversight. Those who thought they might shape the new government from the sidelines quickly discover that the sidelines no longer exist. Publicly, Camara speaks of reform. He promises cleaner governance, more efficient services, and respect for the rule of law. Privately, the apparatus of surveillance expands. Officers loyal to him are placed in key administrative roles: customs, border control, even cultural ministries, positions that might seem minor but serve as crucial nodes in the web of influence. One mainstream historical fact underscores the shift. The CNDD suspended political party activity for an extended period, framing it as necessary to stabilize the country. In practice, it froze civilian opposition and bought the military time to consolidate. Information closest to Camara shows he personally reviews lists of regional commanders and district administrators, marking which names to rotate, which to promote, and which to quietly retire. His method is meticulous. Never remove too many at once. Never promote someone so quickly that it alarms others, but always make it clear that every position depends on his approval. The tightening grip isn't just about personnel. Regulations begin to shift in ways that give the military first access to contracts and licenses. Journalists who ask too many questions about procurement processes find their permits delayed or revoked. Public gatherings require new layers of authorization, with the final signature often resting on an officer close to Camara. In the capital, the streets adjust. People know which uniforms mean routine patrol and which mean best to keep walking. Shopkeepers notice the subtle change in which vehicles get waved through checkpoints. Conversations in taxis begin to include not just the price of goods, but speculation about who really controls the permits for importing them. Many people still think that these early measures were simply the normal actions of any leader securing a fragile state. Others argue they were the blueprint for turning Guinea into a tightly controlled personal fiefdom. So, what do you think? Can a leader tighten control for stability without planting the seeds of authoritarianism? Camara moves through this period with a visible confidence. He holds televised meetings with ministers, sometimes correcting them mid-sentence in a way that signals both authority and impatience. In rural visits, he listens to complaints, but frames solutions through military channels, suggesting that only the armed forces can truly deliver results. The effect is cumulative. Every new policy, every reshuffle, every controlled gathering sends the same message. Authority comes from the top, and the top is him. Those who dislike it keep their opinions behind closed doors. Those who embrace it find themselves rising faster than they ever could under the old order. Power, once consolidated at home, naturally reaches outward. In the months after securing his position, Camara begins cultivating relationships beyond Guinea's borders, not just with neighboring governments, but with a variety of less official actors who see opportunity in his rule. West Africa's political landscape is a patchwork of shifting alliances. Guinea shares borders with countries facing their own challenges: civil unrest, resource disputes, fragile democracies. In this environment, influence is currency, and Camara moves to acquire it. He sends envoys to capitals across the region, offering cooperation on security matters while quietly seeking reciprocal favors. One mainstream historical fact defines this outreach. During his tenure, Guinea strengthened ties with several regional powers, including Burkina Faso and Libya, aiming to position itself as a significant player in the economic community of West African states, ECOWAS. These relationships offered both political legitimacy and economic opportunities. Information closest to Camara suggests that not all his partnerships are conventional. In addition to state-to-state diplomacy, he opens channels with traders, cross-border transporters, and figures known for operating in the gray areas of law. Some of these individuals handle commodities. Others deal in less traceable goods. The relationships are pragmatic, mutual benefit over shared ideology. Foreign allies see potential in Guinea's resources and its strategic location on the Atlantic coast. Some promise investment in infrastructure. Others send discreet shipments of military supplies. In return, Camara offers favorable terms, access to ports, or simply the guarantee that their interests will be protected under his watch. Back home, these alliances are not widely advertised. The state media shows him shaking hands with foreign leaders, smiling under the flash of cameras, but omits the private meetings in quiet villas or on secluded military compounds where the most consequential deals are struck. Many people still think that his ties to certain controversial figures abroad were less about ideology and more about securing personal safety nets, plans B and C in case power at home ever slipped. So what do you think? Are such connections a smart insurance policy or an open invitation for suspicion? These relationships also serve another purpose: intelligence. Through friendly channels, Camara learns which of his domestic rivals have been reaching out to foreign partners and which neighboring states might offer sanctuary to opponents. This information becomes a quiet weapon, allowing him to counter threats before they fully form. The result is a leader whose reach now extends beyond the borders on the map. In the palace, maps of the region are marked not just with capitals, but with the names of individuals, formal and informal, whose loyalty can be called upon when needed. Guinea's foreign policy, under Camara, is not simply about treaties and trade. It's about weaving a net of obligations and favors strong enough to hold him if the ground ever gives way. The early cheers that greeted Camara's rise begin to thin into a quieter hum. At first, people had poured into the streets to see the young officer who promised to sweep out corruption and restore dignity. Now, in the markets of Conakry, the tone has shifted. Vendors still smile, but they weigh their words before speaking. Taxi drivers still call out his name, but more out of habit than enthusiasm. It starts subtly. Prices creeping upward, fuel shortages resurfacing, and public works projects slowing before completion. The city feels the strain first, but word travels quickly to the rural towns, where expectations had been high after the coup. In villages, farmers ask when the new roads will be finished, when the promised clinics will open. The answers they receive are vague. One mainstream historical fact underlines the tension. By mid-2009, labor unions and opposition groups in Guinea were openly expressing frustration over stalled reforms and continued military dominance in politics. Protests began to surface despite restrictions. Information closest to Camara indicates he is aware of this erosion of goodwill. In private meetings, he tells aides that the people must be reminded of progress, whether through visible projects, symbolic gestures, or direct engagement. This leads to a fresh wave of public appearances, unannounced visits to marketplaces, school inspections, and radio call-in sessions where citizens can speak to him directly. These gestures work, but only temporarily. For every citizen impressed by his accessibility, another quietly wonders why promises are still unfulfilled. The whispers in the streets now carry not just curiosity, but doubt. Some officers begin to notice the shift too. They had expected that Camara's popularity would make their jobs easier, shielding the military from public criticism. Instead, resentment is starting to land on the institution itself. For soldiers stationed at checkpoints, the grumbles from passing civilians are a daily reminder that goodwill is fading. Many people still think that this was the point when Camara could have slowed down, recalibrated, and shifted toward broader civilian governance to preserve his image. So what do you think? Does holding on too tightly to power always end up turning the public against you? In the neighborhoods, musicians begin slipping subtle lines into songs, verses about hope turning to hunger, about leaders who smile in public but eat in secret. These songs don't name him, but everyone knows who they mean. Street artists paint murals of watchful eyes and closed fists. Camara feels it. His speeches start to carry a sharper edge, a warning tone. He talks about saboteurs, about those who would undo the progress made since the coup. And while many still support him, The mood in Guinea is no longer the unified optimism of those early days. The chants are quieter, the applause shorter, and in the spaces between, the whispers grow bolder. The morning of September 28, 2009, begins with an almost deceptive calm. In Conakry, the air is heavy but still, the streets quieter than usual. By mid-morning, however, the city's heartbeat shifts toward the September Stadium, where opposition leaders have called for a mass rally. Their aim is to reject the idea, never officially confirmed, but widely rumored, that Camara might run for president in the upcoming elections. The stadium fills quickly, a tide of humanity under the bright sun. Banners wave, voices rise, and the atmosphere vibrates with both defiance and anticipation. On the stands, opposition figures speak into crackling microphones, their words carried over the crowd. Calls for democracy, for the military to return to barracks, for an end to unfulfilled promises. One mainstream historical fact frames the day. The September 28th rally would become one of the darkest chapters in Guinea's modern history. Security forces, including elements of the Presidential Guard, entered the stadium and opened fire on demonstrators. Human rights organizations later estimated that more than 150 people were killed and hundreds injured. Information closest to Camara paints a murkier picture. Those in his inner circle claim he did not order a massacre, that his instructions were to maintain order without lethal force. Others insist that the units involved acted under standing directives to crush any large-scale opposition gatherings. What is certain is that the violence was swift and overwhelming. Gunfire, panic, bodies falling where moments earlier there had been singing. The chaos spreads beyond the stadium. Streets nearby fill with terrified civilians fleeing in every direction. Shops close abruptly, their metal shutters rattling down. In the hours that follow, the city's usual noise is replaced by the wail of sirens and the murmurs of those recounting what they saw. Many people still think that this was the turning point, that whatever goodwill remained toward Camara was shattered that day, no matter what explanations followed. So what do you think? Can a leader ever recover public trust after such a rupture, even if the blame is contested? International condemnation is immediate. The African Union, the United Nations, and Western governments call for investigations. Foreign ministers summon Guinea's ambassadors to demand answers. Human rights groups release reports within days, their language sharp and unyielding. Inside the palace, tension hardens into something more dangerous. Some officers argue for a complete denial of responsibility. Others urge an inquiry to contain the damage. Camara holds press appearances, speaking with a tone that mixes regret with defiance. He pledges that the guilty will be held accountable, but also warns against political manipulation of the tragedy. Outside, the funerals begin. Small, hurried ceremonies under the watch of soldiers. The grief in the streets is heavy, palpable. The chants that once carried his name are now replaced with quiet, urgent conversations about what comes next. And for the first time since the coup, the man who rose with such speed begins to feel the weight of a country, no longer looking at him with hope, but with a wary, measured gaze. In the days after the stadium massacre, Conakry feels like a city holding its breath. Soldiers patrol in pairs and threes, their boots striking the pavement with a rhythm that seems louder than before. The markets reopen, but the usual music from radios is muted, replaced by the soft murmur of bargaining. People speak in shorter sentences, as if trimming their words might also trim their risk. International outrage gathers speed. ECOWAS sends envoys. The African Union suspends Guinea. France, the former colonial power, issues strong statements, and the United Nations launches an inquiry. Even countries that had recently courted Camara for mining deals begin to distance themselves, at least in public. One mainstream historical fact. Within weeks, the International Criminal Court announced that the events of September 28th could constitute crimes against humanity, opening the door to potential prosecution of those responsible. Information closest to Camara suggests the foreign criticism stings more than he lets on. In private meetings, he complains about hypocrisy, how some of the same governments condemning him had no trouble shaking his hand when resource contracts were on the table. But he also knows that image matters, and the image of Guinea now is stained. The palace becomes a place of constant strategy sessions. Some advisors push for rapid reforms, lifting restrictions on political parties to calm tensions. Others urge tightening the grip, silencing dissent more aggressively before it can gather momentum. Camara vacillates, aware that either path could weaken him. Many people still think that his refusal to fully own the tragedy was less about guilt and more about fear, that admitting too much would invite not just international prosecution, but domestic retribution. So what do you think? Can a leader survive by standing between denial and confession? Or does that position inevitably collapse? On the streets, the opposition regroups. Their leaders, some in hiding and others abroad, use the massacre as proof that the military cannot be trusted with political power. Leaflets appear in markets, unsigned but unmistakable in tone, calling for civilian rule. At night, the city's skyline flickers under an unstable power grid. In certain neighborhoods, the sound of boots after dark makes residents pull curtains tight. For the first time, whispers of another coup, this time against Camara, begin to circulate, especially among officers who see the stadium events as a liability for their own futures. Camara responds with calculated visibility. He appears at public events, shaking hands with school children and inspecting military drills. His voice on state radio is firm, assuring the nation that Guinea will not fall to chaos. But the subtext is clear. He is holding the country together with his own two hands, and the grip is starting to ache. Behind the palace's guarded gates, decisions are made in rooms where the air is thick with cigarette smoke and the low hum of ceiling fans. These are not cabinet meetings in the traditional sense. They are gatherings of men who understand that the survival of the regime depends as much on loyalty and silence as on any formal policy. Camara's inner circle is small but strategic. It includes fellow officers from his earlier postings, a few civilian technocrats willing to work under military oversight, and businessmen whose fortunes have grown in step with the CNDD's control. These men form the protective wall between Camara and the chaos outside, but they also form the bottleneck through which all major decisions must pass. One mainstream historical fact. After the September 28th massacre, Guinea's leadership came under targeted sanctions from the European Union and the United States, including travel bans and asset freezes for key figures. This limited not only their international mobility, but also their ability to conduct certain business operations abroad. Information closest to Camara reveals how the palace adapted. With formal channels restricted, unofficial ones expanded. Trusted intermediaries began handling negotiations for contracts, arms deals, and supply lines, using layers of cutouts to obscure the trail. Meetings that might once have taken place in conference rooms now happened in private homes, or at military compounds away from the capital. In this closed world, every favor granted created a debt, and every debt became a form of control. A fuel shipment expedited for a regional commander meant his unquestioning loyalty for the next crisis. A mining concession steered to a businessman guaranteed campaign funds for friendly political movements. The palace became less a seat of government and more the hub of a transactional network. Many people still think that the secrecy of this period was as much about managing the military's own ambitions as it was about avoiding international scrutiny. So what do you think? Does secrecy protect a leader, or does it simply isolate him from the truths he needs to hear? Outside these walls, life for ordinary Guineans shifted subtly but noticeably. Certain goods became harder to find unless one knew the right shopkeeper. Permits for small businesses slowed unless payments found their way to the correct desk. The capital's nightlife, once vibrant despite economic struggles, dimmed as curfews and checkpoints discouraged gatherings after dark. Camara seemed to thrive in this environment of controlled access. He relished unannounced inspections of ministries, sometimes arriving with no warning to demand records or fire a director on the spot. To supporters, it was proof of his vigilance. To critics, it was intimidation dressed as governance. By late 2009, the palace's inner workings were more guarded than ever. What had begun as a movement promising transparency now moved in shadows, with every corridor conversation weighed for its political cost. Camara was still firmly in control, but control in this new reality meant keeping one eye on the streets and the other on the very men sworn to protect him. The uniform is more than cloth. It's a shield, a signal, and a reminder of where power flows. For Camara, remaining in military attire is deliberate. Even as some suggest that he adopt the suits of a civilian statesman, he chooses the camouflage and beret. It sends a message. The state and the army are one, and he is both. His public appearances often blur the line between political leadership and martial performance. He arrives at events in convoys of military vehicles, steps out flanked by armed guards, and addresses the crowd with the clipped authority of a commander. The words may be about schools, roads, and investment, but the image is all soldier. One mainstream historical fact: under Camara's leadership, the CNDD consistently emphasized its identity as a military government, resisting calls from domestic and international actors to swiftly transition to civilian rule. Information closest to Camara suggests that the choice to remain visibly in uniform is calculated. Internally, it reassures loyal officers that he is one of them, not a politician who will discard them once he consolidates power. Externally, it projects strength in a region where coups are often followed by quick handovers to civilians. Handovers that Camara has no intention of making on anyone else's timetable. But the uniform also hides a more complicated truth. Beneath the surface of state duties, the structure of power increasingly resembles that of a criminal enterprise. Control over lucrative smuggling routes, fuel, timber, minerals, flows through military channels. Certain ports and border crossings operate as semi-private revenue streams for officers in favor. Intelligence about law enforcement movements is traded like currency, ensuring that allied networks avoid raids while rivals face surprise inspections. This overlap between state and shadow economy is no accident. Camara knows that economic dependence is as binding as political loyalty. Officers enriched through these channels are far less likely to plot against the hand that feeds them. Many people still think that this blending of governance and organized crime was a survival tactic, not a greed-driven venture. That in his view, the state could not be held without controlling the shadow markets. So what do you think? Can a leader justify bending the law if he believes it keeps the peace? The image of the uniformed Don becomes part of his legend. In some neighborhoods, children imitate his salute during play. In others, his name is spoken in the same breath as the smugglers and fixers who operate under his watch. For the urban elite, this dual identity is unsettling. For those in the informal economy, it is simply the way things have always been. Only now, the top man wears his rank openly. By the end of 2009, Camara's camouflage is more than a uniform. It is a brand, one that says the military is not stepping aside and that the lines between legal authority and underground influence are not just blurred, they are the same line. Rivalries in Guinea rarely play out on open stages. They grow in the dim spaces between official meetings, in coded exchanges, in the quiet reshuffling of assignments. By early 2010, Camara can feel it. The weight of certain stares in the officer's mess, the way conversations pause when he enters a room. Some of these rivals are veterans who resent his rapid rise, men who had spent decades maneuvering for influence, only to watch a younger, less senior officer leapfrog to the top. Others are former allies who feel their contributions during the coup have gone unrewarded. And there are those who see opportunity in the international pressure mounting after the stadium massacre, believing they can present themselves as a cleaner, more acceptable alternative, one mainstream historical fact. Within the CNDD, tensions had begun to surface between Camara and other senior members, most notably his aide-de-camp, Lieutenant Abubakar Toumba Diakite, who would later become central to the events that shifted Guinea's power structure. Information closest to Camara suggests he tried to manage these tensions with a mixture of rewards and warnings. Key rivals received high-profile assignments abroad or postings to distant provinces, moves framed as promotions, but designed to keep them far from the capital's intrigue. Others were brought into his inner circle, given just enough influence to feel valued, but not enough to pose a real threat. In the city, the signs of this quiet contest are subtle but present. Certain military convoys begin to avoid crossing paths. Officers who once attended public ceremonies together now appear separately. The palace guards, usually a seamless unit, start to shift their composition week to week, as if no single group should get too comfortable. Many people still think that Camara underestimated the depth of resentment brewing in these circles, that his focus on external threats blinded him to the danger just outside his office door. So, what do you think? Are the greatest threats to a leader usually across the border or across the hallway? Diplomatic envoys visiting Conakry begin to notice the strain. In their private cables, they describe a leadership divided, one that still controls the state, but has started to feed on itself. International observers quietly predict that if Camara cannot repair these internal rifts, someone else will act for him. Camara, for his part, walks a careful line. In public, he projects unity, speaking of the CNDD as a single, disciplined body. In private, he moves pieces on the chessboard, trying to ensure that any two rivals remain just far enough apart to avoid collaboration. But the corridors of power are small in Guinea, and the walls do not keep whispers from crossing. By mid-year, the rivalries are no longer background noise. They are the bass note under every conversation, the steady hum beneath the speeches and ceremonies. Something will eventually break. The question is only when, and who will make the first move. The first crack comes without fanfare, no public announcement, no clear warning. It begins with an argument behind closed doors between Camara and his aide-de-camp, Lieutenant Abubakar Toumba Diakite. Accounts differ on the exact spark. Some say it's about the international investigation into the September Stadium massacre. Others whisper it's about unpaid bonuses promised to the Presidential Guard. A few insist it's personal, rooted in a long brewing rivalry that neither man ever fully hid. What is certain is that the argument turns sharp. Voices rise. Those outside the room hear the scrape of chairs, the thump of a fist against a table. When the door opens, the tension follows them like heat. One mainstream historical fact. On December 3rd, 2009, during a meeting at a military camp in Conakry, Lieutenant Diakité shot Camara in the head at close range, gravely wounding him. Information closest to Camara's circle reveals the shooting is chaotic and sudden. One moment, the two men are speaking in clipped tones. The next, Diakité pulls his sidearm and fires. The bullet strikes Camara, but does not kill him. Panic explodes in the room. Guards shouting, chairs toppling, the metallic smell of gunpowder hanging in the air. Many people still think that Diakité acted out of self-preservation, fearing he would be made the scapegoat for the stadium killings. Others argue it was the culmination of months of mistrust and perceived slights. So what do you think? When two men in power turn on each other, is it about principle? Or is it always about survival? Camara is rushed from the room, bleeding but conscious. His guards scramble to secure the area, some chasing after Diakité, others forming a protective ring around their wounded leader. Within minutes, news of the shooting begins to ripple through the barracks, carried in urgent, half-whispered fragments. The city reacts with a mix of shock and fatalism. In Conakry, assassination attempts are not unheard of, but few expected one to unfold so openly within the top command. Rumors flare. Some say Camara is dead, others that he has been flown out of the country already. By nightfall, the truth settles. He is alive, but his condition is serious. The once unshakable image of Guinea's leader is suddenly fragile, and in politics, fragility invites movement. Behind the scenes, figures who have been waiting for such a moment begin to make their calculations. The hours after the shooting blur into a haze of urgency. A military convoy, headlights cutting through the humid Conakry night, speeds toward the airport. Inside one of the vehicles, Camara lies on a stretcher, his head bandaged, his uniform stained with dark patches. The decision has been made. He will be evacuated for treatment abroad. One mainstream historical fact. Within days of the December 3rd, 2009 shooting, Camara was flown to Morocco to undergo surgery and recovery, placing him physically outside the country during a critical moment in Guinea's political future. Information closest to Camara suggests the evacuation was not purely a medical choice. Keeping him in Guinea risked further attempts on his life, especially while tensions among the CNDD leadership were at their peak. Moving him abroad allowed his allies to secure him under tighter, foreign-guarded conditions, away from the immediate reach of his rivals. As the plane lifts into the night sky, the balance of power on the ground begins to shift. In his absence, the day-to-day running of Guinea falls into the hands of General Sékouba Konaté, the defense minister and a man with his own network of loyalties. Publicly, Konaté speaks of unity and continuity. Privately, he begins to chart his own path, one that doesn't necessarily lead to Camara's return as head of state. Back in Conakry, soldiers adjust their salutes. Some begin referring to Konaté as the de facto leader. Ministers who once reported directly to Camara now find themselves answering to someone else. The corridors of the palace feel different, less tense in some ways, more uncertain in others. Many people still think that Camara believed his authority would remain intact during his recovery, that his absence was temporary, and his return inevitable. Others argue that the moment he left Guinea, he lost the practical control that makes leadership real. So what do you think? Can a leader hold power from a hospital bed in another country, or does distance always erode command? Meanwhile, international actors see an opening. ECOWAS representatives and foreign diplomats intensify their visits, urging a transition toward civilian governance. With Camara silent and out of sight, the idea of an election without him starts to seem less like a dream and more like a timetable. In Morocco, Camara's days are filled with medical procedures and guarded conversations. He asks for updates on the country's affairs, but the reports he receives are filtered through the hands of those who now stand to gain from his absence. Each passing week lengthens the shadow between him and the seat of power he once occupied so firmly. From his hospital bed in Morocco, Camara stares at the ceiling tiles, counting them not out of boredom, but as a way to keep his mind from spiraling. The wound is healing, though the pain comes in flashes, sharp reminders of the day a trusted aide turned the gun on him. Around him, the air smells faintly of antiseptic and brewed mint tea, a constant reminder that he is far from the dust and diesel of Conakry. But power does not pause for recovery. Across Guinea's porous borders, movement quickens. Smugglers, traders, and political operatives sense the vacuum. The gold leaving the forested regions, the timber trucked toward ports, the fuel shipments crossing from Sierra Leone and Liberia. These flows begin to shift, finding new hands to grease. One mainstream historical fact: Guinea's location makes it a key node in West African smuggling networks, with contraband ranging from minerals and fuel to arms and narcotics passing through its borders. In times of political instability, these networks often expand. Information closest to Camara suggests that before the shooting, he had worked quietly to centralize control over these routes, ensuring that profits flowed back to his circle. His absence changes the equation. Officers loyal to him now compete with those loyal to General Konate, and border commanders begin hedging their bets, cooperating with whichever faction seems strongest in the moment. Along the Mano River, boats laden with goods slip between official checkpoints, some with the quiet blessing of local military units. On dusty inland roads, trucks carry unregistered cargo under tarps, escorted by armed men who flash documents bearing both old and new seals, covering all possibilities. Many people still think that this border gamesmanship wasn't just about economics. It was a barometer of political loyalty. So what do you think? When control of trade routes shifts, is it just smuggling, or is it the earliest sign of a power transfer? From Morocco, Camara tries to maintain contact through encrypted calls and hand-carried messages, but every instruction he sends takes days to reach its destination, and every response feels stale by the time it arrives. In West African politics, a delay of days can undo years of work. Meanwhile, Konate uses the language of stability. He meets with regional leaders, promising cooperation on border security, even as those same borders remain leaky by design. The quiet truth is that smuggling routes are not just tolerated. They are tools, rewarding allies and starving rivals. For the first time since his coup, Camara feels the cold edge of irrelevance creeping in. His grip on Guinea's under-the-table economy is loosening, and with it, the network of loyalty that once anchored his rule. In politics, distance is dangerous, but time is fatal. By early 2010, months have passed since Camara left Guinea, and the air in Conakry is changing. The loyalty that once pulsed toward him now drifts toward General Sékouba Konate, who has embraced the role of acting leader with a careful blend of military discipline and diplomatic tact. Internationally, Konate becomes the face of Guinea's transition, speaking in measured tones to ECOWAS, the African Union, and Western governments. His image contrasts sharply with the one the world remembers of Camara in his final months before the shooting. Fiery speeches, abrupt decisions, a government that often looked reactive rather than deliberate. The shift is deliberate, and it works. One mainstream historical fact: under Konaté's stewardship, Guinea agreed to a transitional process leading toward democratic elections, which were eventually held in 2010, the first of their kind since independence. Information closest to Camara indicates that he is deeply frustrated by these developments. From Morocco, he sends messages warning his allies to slow the transition, to preserve military oversight until his return. But his words are not law anymore. Some of his former loyalists now see greater opportunity in backing the new roadmap, hoping to secure positions in a post-military government. In diplomatic circles, patience for Camara wanes. Foreign leaders who once courted him for resource deals begin quietly shifting their attention. Mining executives who had flown in for photo ops now send their lobbyists to Konaté's office. The reality is clear. The world deals with whoever sits in the chair, not whoever still claims it from afar. Many people still think that Camara believed his exile was temporary, that Guinea would pause in his absence. But politics doesn't pause, it redirects. So what do you think? Can a man still be president in spirit if the machinery of state no longer answers to him? Even within the CNDD, the mood shifts. Officers who once owed their ranks to Camara now measure their future in Konaté's favor. Military ceremonies feature his name more often, and his presence at the front of parades signals where real authority now resides. From Morocco, Camara watches this transformation through filtered reports and scattered photographs. The streets of Conakry, once lined with his posters, now carry fewer traces of his image. In their place are banners about unity, stability, and elections, a narrative in which his name appears less and less. The message is subtle but unmistakable. Guinea is preparing to move on, and the man who once strode through the capital in uniform, saluted by crowds, now lies half a continent away, a former center of gravity watching his orbit drift into another man's hands. From his quiet recovery in Morocco, Camara begins to notice the change in his own voice. In the early weeks after the shooting, his phone calls to Conakry are crisp, decisive, almost commanding. By the spring of 2010, they carry a different tone, less instruction, more inquiry. He asks how the situation is, rather than telling people what to do. The subtle shift is not lost on those listening. In public, Konaté now speaks as though the transition is inevitable. His speeches are peppered with words like democracy, reconciliation, and elections, terms that once belonged to the opposition's vocabulary. Internationally, these statements play well. Domestically, they reassure a weary population that the era of military rule may be drawing to a close. One mainstream historical fact. During 2010, General Konaté oversaw preparations for Guinea's first democratic presidential election since independence, eventually won by Alpha Condé in November of that year. Information closest to Camara reveals his growing unease. Reports from his remaining loyalists describe a government reshaping itself in ways that leave little room for him. Certain mining contracts he personally brokered are being revisited. Appointees he trusted are either replaced outright or reassigned to less influential posts. The architecture of his power, carefully built over his year in control, is being dismantled brick by brick. In Conakry, people speak his name less. When they do, it is often in the past tense, as if he were a chapter that has already closed. Street vendors, who once sold posters and badges with his image, now display the green and yellow banners of the coming election. Many people still think that Camara's downfall wasn't the shooting itself, but the speed with which the political winds turned once he was out of sight. So what do you think? Is the real measure of a leader how he rises, or how quickly he's forgotten when absent? The erosion of his influence is clearest in the military ranks. Commanders who once waited for his approval now take orders exclusively from Konate. Patrol schedules, promotions, even ceremonial guard details are decided without consulting the man who still claims the presidency from abroad. In Morocco, Camara begins to understand that leadership is more than a title. It's a constant presence, and presence once lost is almost impossible to recover. By mid-2010, the CNDD is no longer the tight, unified bloc that stormed into power in the wake of Conté's death. Under Konaté's hand, it has fractured into distinct factions, some loyal to him, others to the idea of Camara's return, and a few simply loyal to their own survival. The cohesion that once came from seizing power together now dissolves in the slow grind of competing interests. In the barracks, this shift is visible. Soldiers who once wore Camara's image on armbands now leave them folded away. Conversations about his possible return are met with polite nods, but quickly steered towards safer topics. Loyalty, in Guinea's military, is measured in proximity to the man holding the microphone, not the one sending messages from another continent. One mainstream historical fact: as the 2010 elections drew closer, Konaté positioned himself as the guarantor of a peaceful transition, earning cautious praise from both domestic opposition groups and international observers. Information closest to Camara suggests he still harbors hope of reasserting control. He considers returning before the election, calculating that his physical presence could shift momentum back in his favor. Yet each piece of advice he receives warns against it. The security situation is uncertain. His former allies may not rally as expected, and the international community now sees Konaté as the face of stability. Many people still think that the moment Camara hesitated to step back into Guinea sealed his fate. That power was waiting for a claimant, and by not seizing it, he allowed the void to close without him. So what do you think? Does caution preserve a leader's life, or does it quietly erase his relevance? The fractured command becomes most apparent in decision-making. Orders from the top are no longer unanimous in tone or execution. A directive from Konaté might be carried out to the letter in one region, quietly ignored in another. Some officers hedge their bets, following instructions selectively depending on which future they believe will prevail. Even the palace reflects this divided spirit. The inner courtyard, once buzzing with coordinated activity, now feels like a place of parallel governments. Konaté's men moving with purpose, and a few remaining Camara loyalists lingering on the edges, exchanging information in murmurs. From Morocco, Camara watches this fragmentation with a growing sense of distance, as though the Guinea he once commanded is fading into a version he can no longer fully recognize. The machine still runs, but it no longer answers to the man who built it. The night it happens is warm, the air thick with the scent of the sea drifting up from Conakry's harbor. In the palace, the lights burn late. Soldiers move through the corridors with an urgency they try to disguise as routine, but their tightened jaws and quickened steps betray them. Word spreads in whispers first. Something's gone wrong. Outside the capital, gunfire cracks the air. It's not a battle, not yet, but the sharp bursts of automatic weapons echo like warnings. In the hours that follow, the city hums with half-truths. Some say a group of officers has attempted to unseat Konate. Others insist it's a settling of scores among the presidential guard. One mainstream historical fact, although no large-scale coup attempt succeeded in late 2010, Guinea's transition period was marked by smaller incidents of violence and political tension, reflecting the fragility of the moment. Information closest to Camara suggests the night shots were not random. They were the culmination of weeks of hushed plotting among officers who resented both Konate's growing influence and the sidelining of the old CNDD leadership. While no one openly declared allegiance to Camara, his name floated at the edges of the conspiracy, as a possible figurehead if the balance of power tipped their way. In the darkness, checkpoints multiply. The clatter of armored vehicles on city streets keeps residents awake. Radios play government statements denying any unrest, even as the sound of boots and engines says otherwise. Many people still think that this was the last gasp of the factions who believed Camara could return, that the shots were less about seizing power outright and more about sending a message. So what do you think? Can a warning volley ever reverse a tide that's already turned? By dawn, the streets are calmer, but the air feels different. Konate's men have tightened control, arresting suspected plotters and reassigning others to remote posts. Any pretense of unity within the CNDD is gone, replaced by open knowledge that the leadership is a collection of rival camps. From Morocco, Camara hears the reports with a mix of pride and frustration. Pride that his name still sparks movement. Frustration that the movement could not carry him back into power. The shots have rung out, but the man they might have been for remains far from the stage. For weeks after the gunfire in Conakry, the political atmosphere feels brittle, like glass under strain. Konate tightens his grip, shuffling officers between commands so quickly that no one can plant deep roots. The arrests from the unrest are swift and targeted, yet rumors say more names remain on hidden lists. Those spared begin to act with deliberate caution, as though every handshake might be measured for loyalty. In Morocco, Camara senses the final narrowing of his options. His doctors speak of recovery in months, but politics moves in days. The networks he once commanded are being rewired, their channels diverted toward new centers of power. Calls from old allies come less frequently, and when they do, the tone is clipped, polite updates without the warmth of shared cause. One mainstream historical fact: early in 2010, while still in exile, Camara was officially replaced as CNDD leader by General Sekouba Konate, effectively ending his direct control over the military government he founded. Information closest to Camara suggests that by this stage, he begins exploring quiet negotiations for his own exit, terms that might allow him to return to Guinea under some form of immunity or reduced role. These talks are discreet, often routed through intermediaries who also serve other agendas. Many people still think that his eventual departure from the political scene was less a choice than the acceptance of an unavoidable reality, that every path back to Conakry led through the man now sitting in his former chair. So what do you think? Does leaving on your own terms matter if those terms are dictated by someone else? The flight into shadows is not a single event, but a gradual fading. Camara stops appearing even in official photographs from Guinea's state media. Foreign journalists who once sought interviews move on to the next headline. His name still appears in the reports of human rights investigators, but in the context of legal proceedings rather than current leadership. By the end of the year, his presence in Guinea exists only in two forms: whispered nostalgia, among a dwindling base of supporters, and the lingering caution in the eyes of those who once feared his sudden visits to their offices. The man who seized power in a day is now a shadow on the country's memory, still visible to some, but no longer part of its daily life. Life in exile is a study in contrasts. In Morocco, Camara's days are ordered and quiet. Mornings marked by the call to prayer drifting through the window, afternoons spent in physical therapy, evenings passed in the low hum of diplomatic gossip from visitors. Yet beneath the surface calm lies a restless current. He is a man used to command, now reduced to watching his country through the filter of other people's words. At first, his accommodations are those of a guest with influence, a secure residence, discreet security, access to officials who still consider him a valuable contact. But as months turn into years, the visits grow less frequent. The circle of those who still check on him tightens. Conversations drift away from Guinea's immediate politics toward broader regional news. He is not forgotten entirely, but he is no longer the pivot point. One mainstream historical fact. After the 2009 shooting, Camara remained in Morocco for an extended recovery before eventually moving to Burkina Faso, where he lived for years in relative obscurity. Information closest to Camara's situation suggests that his life abroad is a delicate balance. He must maintain visibility just enough to deter attempts at legal prosecution, yet keep a low enough profile to avoid stirring political backlash in Guinea. This means carefully choosing public appearances, granting interviews only when strategically necessary, and keeping most movements private. Many people still think that exile can be a kind of slow erasure, that without the daily theater of power, even the most commanding figure becomes just another man abroad. So what do you think? Does influence fade because people stop listening? Or because the speaker no longer has the stage? In the cafes of Ouagadougou and Rabat, expatriates sometimes spot him, taller than most, his gait still military despite the limp from his injury. Some approach, offering respectful greetings. Others watch from a distance, unsure if he welcomes the reminder of what he once was. In these moments, Camara remains composed. He asks about home, about the markets, the streets, the weather in Conakry, but his eyes often drift past the answer, fixed on something only he can see, a map of a country he can no longer walk without permission. If exile teaches anything, it is patience. By the time Camara settles into life in Burkina Faso, the urgency that once defined his everyday has been replaced by a slower rhythm. The streets here do not echo with his name, and the politics of the host country are their own complicated web, one in which he is a guest, not a player. Yet even far from Conakry, the past follows him. Human rights organizations continue to build cases related to the September 28, 2009 massacre. Investigators request interviews, lawyers send formal notices, and occasionally, his name reappears in international headlines when the court process advances. Each time, he issues the same line. He is ready to face justice, but only under fair and transparent conditions. One mainstream historical fact. In 2022, Camara and several former officials finally stood trial in Guinea over the 2009 stadium killings after years of delays and political maneuvering. Information closest to Camara suggests that in the years leading up to the trial, he balanced legal strategy with personal safety. He avoided travel to countries where extradition was likely, maintained a tight circle of confidence, and cultivated quiet goodwill among influential figures in West Africa who could act as intermediaries if needed. Many people still think that his decision to eventually return for trial was calculated, that he weighed the risk of imprisonment against the possibility of reshaping his legacy by facing accusations head-on. So, what do you think? Can confronting your past in court ever restore the authority you once held? In Burkina Faso, his days are filled with routines designed to keep him steady. Morning walks in shaded avenues, afternoons reading newspapers from across the region, evenings over tea with the few who have remained loyal. News from Guinea arrives filtered through multiple voices, some sympathetic, others critical, all reminding him that his story there is unfinished. At night, in the quiet of his residence, he sometimes replays the path that led him here. The barracks, the coup, the cheers, the shadows, the shot that changed everything. Outside, the city sleeps. Inside, a man waits, not for the return of power, but for the reckoning that will decide how history remembers him. When the summons finally comes, it is both expected and unsettling. Years of legal wrangling, political shifts, and international pressure converge into a single reality. Moussa Dadis Camara will stand trial in Guinea. The journey back is not triumphant. It is deliberate, measured, shadowed by security escorts, and the watchful eyes of those who wonder if his return will stir old loyalties or ignite fresh tensions. Conakry has changed since he last walked its streets. The traffic feels heavier, the skyline dotted with new buildings, the faces younger. In the courthouse, rows of benches are filled with survivors of the September 28th massacre, their families, journalists, and diplomats. The air inside is taut, charged with a history that refuses to stay in the past. One mainstream historical fact. In September 2022, Camara and several co-defendants were formally tried for their alleged roles in the 2009 stadium killings, a process that marked a rare instance of a former head of state facing justice in Guinea. Information closest to Camara shows that in court, his posture is steady. He speaks firmly, denying direct responsibility while expressing sympathy for the victims. His lawyers work to frame him as a leader undermined by rogue subordinates, not the architect of the violence. Outside, opinions are split. Some see his trial as long overdue justice, others as a political theater aimed at closing a chapter with a public spectacle. Many people still think that this final stage is less about guilt or innocence, and more about legacy. That the verdict will shape not just his personal fate, but how future generations understand the Guinea of his era. So what do you think? Does the closing scene define the whole story, or does it merely fix the lens through which the story is told? As the trial stretches on, Camara's presence in the dock becomes part of the daily rhythm of the city. Markets open, taxis run, and yet each day, the courthouse fills again. Inside, testimony drips out. Details, denials, memories. Outside, the world keeps moving. When the final arguments are made, the courtroom grows still. Camara looks forward, expression unreadable. The path from the barracks to this moment has been long, tangled, and often brutal. And now, whatever comes next will belong as much to the historians as it does to him. Night settles gently over Conakry. The courthouse lights fade, replaced by the warm flicker of street lamps and the soft buzz of evening traffic. The heat of the day slips away, leaving the air heavy but still. Somewhere nearby, the sound of a radio hums through the open window of a shop, a slow ballad carrying over the quiet streets. Along the waterfront, waves lap steadily against the break wall, their rhythm unhurried, eternal. In the neighborhoods, families gather for the last tea of the day, the sweet scent of mint curling through the air. Conversations are low, voices softened by the weight of what has been witnessed in recent months. Camara, wherever he rests tonight, is no longer the man who marched into the palace in a burst of ambition. The years, the distance, the trial, they have stripped away the certainty of command, leaving only the patient endurance of a man living with the consequences of his story. And yet, the city is calm. No convoys race through the streets, no chants echo into the night. Whatever verdict comes, Guinea will wake tomorrow to the same sunrise, the same markets, the same slow, stubborn heartbeat that has carried it through every turn of power. So, as the night deepens, let the tension ease from your shoulders. Picture the waves, the scent of tea, the low hum of a quiet street. The story has reached its resting point, and the rest belongs to time itself. Sleep well, knowing that for tonight, the world is still.